I tell you what, it's not like the olden days. I'm Jake.
I'm Rosie.
And can you believe it's 10 years ago today that the very first release from the Olden Days appeared on Your Listen, where it was initially hosted, and that since then we've made so many episodes and specials and said a lot of interesting, insightful things along the way, and very much enjoyed doing so, I think it's fair to say. To celebrate the 10th birthday of the Olden Days, as has been mentioned, here are a few final loose ends that have still been left hanging after all this time, some of which I found whilst uploading the back catalogue of the podcast to Spotify. Let's start by looking back to a very early episode of the Olden Days, which was entitled Masters of the Universe. And one of the things we mentioned there was She-Ra, Princess of Power cartoon 1985. And you were saying how it's nice for girls to get the opportunity to see girls on TV. She-Ra and some of her supporting characters there certainly tick that box. I think the way Filmation approached She-Ra was very much not trying to dumb it down or soften it up for girls. Like He-Man, She-Ra is very much an action hero with a good heart, and I'm sure Filmation were hoping that the boys would enjoy She-Ra too. But I don't think Mattel, who made the She-Ra figures, were hoping that at all. I don't think they viewed She-Ra, Princess of Power, as an action hero, but rather a human version of My Little Pony, whose dolls you could make with loads of soppy hair and soppy little hair brushes to brush it with, and the little girls would buy that. And certainly those She-Ra figures don't have distinct facial features, just different coloured hair and a few very lazy different bits of costume and accessories.
Just like Barbie.
Do you think that's insulting to girls at all on the part of Mattel?
Yes, I do. It suggests that Mattel don't think that girls have any interest in story. If the figures went with a different kind of premise and setup and genre, if it had a story, I'd say, no, that's not insulting. Filmation came up with a story in a certain genre, and Mattel took absolutely no notice of that, perhaps thinking that the girls wouldn't really pay attention.
Yes, I thought that might be somewhat insulting. And I think the starkest example of the difference between the intention of Filmation and the intention of Mattel, and the figures themselves are pretty stark, as I already described. But really, when I was looking at videos exploring the Crystal Castle playset, I was really struck by this. In the She-Ra cartoon, the Crystal Castle is a mysterious bastion of good, a sanctuary in a way. Light Hope lives there, a mysterious source of knowledge and wisdom and power. She-Ra goes to consult him, of course, very much like He-Man consulting the sorceress and Bravestar consulting the shaman, as has been said before. And the Crystal Castle has been used in She-Ra on some occasions as a kind of sanctuary for good characters who need a place of refuge, step away from the hurly-burly and sort their heads out, like the Tomorrow People going back to their spaceship. And in the cartoon, it's quite distinct from Castle Grayskull in this way. The Crystal Castle is never kind of under attack from the Horde. It's a very secret place, very much a safe place, a sanctuary. But what is the Mattel version of the Crystal Castle? A fantasy cloud princess castle, obviously slightly adapted Castle Grayskull mold to look less scary, which doesn't have Light Hope's mystical pool, but rather She-Ra's four-poster bed and She-Ra's vanity mirror, and doesn't match up with the Crystal Castle from the show at all. So I did find that rather a stark difference in the two ways of approaching the concept of the Crystal Castle.
You know, Barbie doesn't have a story, and if you watch The Princess and the Pauper or something, it's because you've been interested in the toy. And that's okay too, but Mattel doesn't understand the difference.
So there we go. It's hard not to get into generalizations and slightly insensitive things to say when talking about gender views and gender roles, but something that struck me there about Filmation and Mattel on that subject that I thought was worth coming back to. let's say a few more words about the Chipmunks, specifically Alvin and the Chipmunks cartoon series from the 1980s, which you've been watching through recently.
Yes, I have an opportunity to do so, which I've been wanting for a very long time, and it's interesting to see patterns emerging in how the show was developed. Season 1 is really trying to find its feet. The first episode and the last episode are the only ones to feature the Chipettes. The second season is really still trying to find its feet, and the Chipettes are very little used still. There's one writer called Diane Dixon, whose episodes really do point the way in terms of characterization and the sorts of things that the characters might do. Season 3 is something of a peak. They use the Chipettes a lot more, and I don't mean to imply the Chipettes are the only thing that make it good. There are good episodes without them in it at all. But they certainly do add something, and using them generously is a good idea. Season 4 is sort of starting to drop off a bit, and it has only 8 episodes, whereas the earlier seasons have more than that. And Season 5 also has 8 episodes, 16 stories, that adds up to, almost all of which are about the Pratt version of Alvin. And I was getting quite annoyed by Season 5. And even Diane Dixon, whose episodes are sort of saving graces in terms of characterization, is starting to run out of ideas, and who can blame her? I just recently started season 6, and I was looking at what the episodes were going to be, and I was struck by how many were the ones I'd been hoping to see. Even though many of the episodes aren't perfect, the characterization is on point. Okay, sometimes Alvin is taken a little bit too far, but these writers know that he doesn't dick people around deliberately, and he has many redeeming qualities. All new writers, all names I haven't seen before. Another thing they've done is that they've gone for full 20-minute stories, and I'm getting towards the middle of season 6 now, and they are starting to drop off a bit, get a bit silly or a bit boring, and it's interesting to see that later in the series they've got some more 10-minute stories, including some really memorable, really good ones that I've been waiting for. The Wall, which is that very poignant, memorable episode about the Berlin Wall, just 10 minutes, that's all it needs. Quarterback and Curlers, an interesting Alvin and Brittany situation. And they've also been going for quite a few parodies. And really, they're mostly using the Chipettes for parodies. They've sort of almost run out of ideas what to do with them in real life, which is a shame. And they've gone for 24 episodes in season 6, which does suggest a real big push, concentrated effort to make a decent, substantial series. Looking ahead to season 7, not quite so many episodes, not quite so many good, memorable ones. I seem to remember there's nothing really wrong with them, but nothing really stands out either. And then, of course, season 8 is Chipmunks Go to the Movies.
Not surprising at that point they went full parody, because they've been making some good episodes that way and were obviously not running short of inspiration for parodies to do. Recently we watched the Chipmunk Adventure movie for the first time in a long time, and I was very disappointed by how little sense it actually makes. You could make a movie about the Chipmunks and the Chipettes having a balloon race around the world. Make a lot of sense, surprising as that may seem, and I was thinking quite carefully about how to do so. And in the version I came up with, we can even retain Alvin and Simon being dressed in nothing but loincloths for the final act, and it will still make perfect sense. So let's hope to see that version someday. When we made our Digimon podcast all those years ago, we had a plan to watch again, get to grips with Digimon Adventure Season 2. But just to tie up that loose end and not leave you wondering for the rest of your life, we never did decide to or want to watch Series 2 again. It's true that Series 1 really is untouchable, very much like with Dogtanian and the Mysterious Cities of Gold. And yes, we've just never really felt that Series 2 was worth watching, engaging with, very much unlike Series 1. And as a final note of interest on the subject of Digimon, you found a little short, didn't you?
A little research tells me that it premiered Digimon Con in March 2025, which is the same year that it was recommended to me on YouTube. And it is indeed a short, fewer than 5 minutes, made in Japanese, of course, and I had some English subtitles to read. And it's a sort of retrospective, symbolic, there'll always be special people growing up and coming into their own, set around the time of the very end of Digimon Adventure 2, where we see all the Digidestined grown up with children of ambiguous parentage, as in the characters probably know whose is whose, but the viewers can very much decide for themselves. And the really interesting thing is that the two who seem to have built a life together and be driving around in a car together with a child, and Cody, but never mind that, are Matt and Ty.
Yes, indeed. Whatever other possible futures for the characters we can read into that short, the main thing is that, as we always suspected, Matt and Ty are a grown-up couple. So there we go. Boy love forever, I say.
Let's just be absolutely crystal clear. It doesn't explicitly say that. I do think it's very much implied.
Little Women is next on the list.
Everything I'm about to say basically boils down to Studio One's 1952-part Little Women has grown on me. I was slagging it off after having watched it once on an update podcast, and since then I decided to make a website, which you can find at littlewomenadaptations.weebly.com should you so wish, where I made a comprehensive list of all the Little Women screen adaptations ever. And I decided to make a rank order and some detailed reviews of all the ones that I had seen. So I had to rewatch Studio One for that, and knowing what to expect this time, I was thinking, oh well, this isn't so bad, and noticing its good points. Originally in my rank order, I put it underneath everything except the modern 2018 version with Leah Thompson. What a waste. And then I found out that you could get it on DVD. In Roger Hargreaves' Mr. Silly, they have this nonsense competition called the Nonsense Cup, where you have to do the most nonsensical thing. Mr. Silly lives in Nonsense Land, of course, so does Mr. Nonsense. And the DVD releases of this Studio One Little Women are rather like that. There's the one DVD where both parts appear alongside a couple of Hallmark movie type things. I don't think they are Hallmark, but they're that kind of thing. Christmas movies from the 90s or around then. There is a pair of Christmas DVDs, one of which has got Meg's story on and one of which has got Joe's story on. And with each of them are 2 episodes of something totally unrelated, not even Studio One episodes. And then there are the ones that I almost bought in a thin case, Meg's story, and in another thin case, Joe's story. And what stopped me from buying these was that I noticed that on the side was written Little Woman. And I also saw, looking at pictures of the blurb on the back, they hadn't understood the story and they had spelled Alcott as Olcott. So I'm not really quite sure which one wins the nonsense competition, but the one I eventually managed to buy was in a proper sized case with Little Women written on the side, both parts on one disc, distributed by this company who source old, interesting TV and movies and put them on DVD for people like me who want them for their collection. And I think possibly a part of me didn't want to like these Studio One episodes more than the things I did have on DVD when I thought I couldn't get it on DVD. But having watched it a couple more times, it's grown on me even more, and it has moved up a couple of places in my rank order after I considered things like that, well, almost anything's better than 2019, and 1949 really is style over substance. Studio One has got less money but more thought put into it. And for the final rank order, you'll have to visit my website.
I didn't actually get round to noting down the entire Olden Days blacklist while I was putting all the back catalogue up on Spotify, but I think it would be hard in the top spot not to put Greta Gerwig, although having said that, she may not be the sole contender. We were very pleased at some point last year to be able to watch in its entirety Incredible Games on YouTube, and what a revelation it was, particularly about Series 2. Some of the things we said in our Incredible Games podcast made a great deal of sense, and perhaps should have been true, like you always get the Dark Knight or the horrible, stupid Crystal Cave. The soup is in every episode in some form. Actually, there are 2 episodes without either version of the soup. Sometimes you do get the Dark Knight and the Crystal Cave, and that completely messes up the number of levels you're getting.
Having the Dark Knight and the Crystal Cave in the same episode, in theory, meant they might potentially go to the basement twice, but of course the game makers didn't want that to happen, did they? So what did they do instead? They made the Dark Knight not play properly and let everybody through.
And the rules we worked out for game distribution from the 6 episodes that we had on video for so long make a lot more sense than what actually did happen in the first 2 and last 2 episodes in airing order of the second series, because as it turned out, those were the 4 of the 10 that we didn't actually have. The Dark Knight is in all 4 of those. I was always very disappointed he was only in 2 of the 6 we had, though actually he's in 6 out of 10 episodes of the whole series. The soup is in 8 out of 10 episodes of the whole series. So is Professor Granville Gravel and his quiz. It really was just an eye-opening experience, and one of many experiences that one has in life that shows how little sense there is in the world, and anything you've managed to make sense of along the way probably doesn't actually really make that much sense when you look back at it. And of course, we also watched all through David Walliams in the Series 1 episodes, and well, he pushes it a bit far, is rather inappropriate sometimes, isn't he, with his banter?
Yes. Now, David Walliams is very engaging, very enthusiastic, throws himself into everything he does, is very funny in the right role. Doing banter with these kids perhaps isn't really the right role for him. As you said, it's personal yet nonsense, telling the kids they look like certain celebrities, for instance. It worked better with Philippa Forrester, Roland Rivron and Keith Chegwin because they were grown up and they could banter back and not take it too seriously. Whereas the kids, I think, were getting a bit uncomfortable with it sometimes.
Just one of many things that is a lot better about Series 2, as has been said before. Gary Parker as Sam the Lift always banters engagingly, appropriately, amusingly and entertainingly for contestants and viewers alike. As I mentioned on the previous release, we've recently watched through all 100 episodes and 2 movies of Hey Arnold, having bought a complete DVD, mostly with an Amazon voucher we were given in compensation by a utility company, which was certainly an unexpected but turned out to be very welcome use of such a gift. Another contender for the top of the Olden Days blacklist may actually be Hey Arnold creator, or designer at least, Craig Bartlett. It's been mentioned in Update how he writes the very worst episodes, how his interpretation of Arnold and Helga is extremely bad. This is because it's stuck in his claymation world of your average daydreaming kid and the bully girl, and he never really wants to move it on too far from there, which is absolutely ridiculous.
The DVD includes a claymation short as a special feature, and it was interesting to see that, and it contains extremely briefly versions of Harold and Helga and Miss Slovak, they're like his enemies, clearly visually portrayed. It doesn't say that explicitly, they're not even doing anything, but they look like archetypal enemies a kid like that would have. And really, they're interpretations of a couple of characters in a book by Betsy Byers called The 18th Emergency. When I first read that book, I kept imagining Arnold as the protagonist and hearing Torin Cordell saying the dialogue. And when we both read it again fairly recently, it struck us more and more, well, this is kind of like Hey Arnold, and that's kind of like Hey Arnold. And this claymation Harold and Helga were very much what you might make if you were building clay models of the 18th Emergency.
I said just now Craig Bartlett designed rather than created Hey Arnold, thinking particularly about Arnold as a character. Craig Bartlett didn't create the character of Arnold, Torrin Cordell did, by interpreting a very nondescript, general boy protagonist character so well and really bringing to life that altruistic, good-hearted, sincere part of the character that became the heart of Arnold. When we were watching the early episodes, I thought, well, where is Arnold's character? It doesn't really exist yet. He'll just do whatever. And then when you get to ones like the one with the turtle, and Torrin Cordell interprets it so well and with so much heart, that's how Arnold, the character that we know and love, was created by Torrin Cordell. Similarly, how close is that bully archetype in claymation that you mentioned to Helga G. Pataki as brought to life by Francesca Marie Smith? Poles apart, quite frankly.
I want to include Justin Shenkaru in that. He really hurls himself into the role of Harold. There's an interesting difference between his interpretation in the pilot and the episode that became. In the pilot, he's being really nasty, bullying. In the episode, he's just being obnoxious. And he really throws himself into being obnoxious. But sometimes, in episodes such as Harold's Kitty and Harold the Butcher, he's really humanized. And Justin does that brilliantly as well and becomes very far removed from that claymation. Marv Hammerman, who's the character in the 80th Emergency.
Yes, Justin did some wonderful work throughout the series, didn't he? And it was very interesting on the DVDs to see that original short pilot version of 24 Hours to Live. And I was quite surprised that Lisa Grain's idea of Helga's secretly in love with him came in there. I thought she came up with it for Downtown as Fruits, which is the first aired episode, but obviously it made it into the first produced pilot version of 24 Hours to Live, which was shown in cinemas before Harriet the Spy, as an interesting trivia point.
Of course, one thing Craig did was replace Torrin Cordell on the grounds that Arnold has to sound young. Well, no, he doesn't really, does he? He has to sound like Torrin Cordell if you want to sustain that character. He only has to sound young if you can't take a step back from that claymation short in which all he is a kid, a general boy protagonist.
When we start talking about Hey Arnold, as is very obvious from our original podcast, we can go on about it for absolutely hours and get into doing so and can't really help it. So in order to try and stop us descending completely into that, let's try and get through the things that are written down. One of the things I wrote down was Arnold as a character, and we've really said most of what there is to say about that. The word that I kept using for Arnold as a character when we were watching through the series was malleable. He's too malleable. Writers can and will do whatever with him. He can fit into all these different roles and have all these different feelings and aspirations, and we're always asked to just accept this is Arnold. When is Arnold at his very best? When we really can love him. When he is that big-hearted character whom you can see exactly why Helga is madly in love with. And seeing things through Helga's eyes is a very important part of the show, because Franny as Helga does carry the entire show in many ways, particularly after Torrin is quite wrongly given the boot. An absolute disgrace, that. And of course no one else could ever really, as you say, truly be Arnold, after Torrin Cordell had created him so masterfully and so deeply and so completely. But we were talking about Arnold's other voices and how there was a lot of very good acting work going on there, just not a lot of Arnoldness. But which of the other voice actors came by far the closest to Torrin Cordell at evoking that Arnoldness, and even developed his own kind of style of Arnoldness? Not quite the same as Torrin Cordell's Arnold, but still a very compelling Arnold.
Spencer.
It was Spencer Klein.
Kind of like Little Women, you can interpret, for example, Joe, like Winona Ryder does, or like Katharine Hepburn does, and they're quite different, but in their way, equally as good or almost as good as each other. Spencer Klein is a different Arnold.
And an absolutely brilliant Arnold. We were both struck particularly by the excellent work that Spencer did in seasons 4 and 5 and Hey Arnold the movie. Philip Van Dyke, Alex D. Lintz, J.D. Daniels in the pilot, as I say, all did some very good acting work, but it kind of adds to the malleable nature of Arnold rather than injecting its own Arnoldness. After we'd watched the Jungle movie for the second time. Oh, I know, we said we would never do that, didn't we, listeners? But we did watch it for a second time. I was moved to remark about Mason Vale Cotton. It was an excellent, sensitive reading of Arnold in the Jungle movie. But of course, being a one-off, he never really gets the chance to develop his own style of Arnoldness. So for that reason, Mason Vale Cotton is a strong third on my list of Arnold voices, behind an extremely strong runner-up Spencer Klein and an absolutely definitive, never should have been replaced voice acting performance for the ages. Absolutely brilliant, along with Francesca Marie Smith as Helga, Torin Cordell. So there we go, those two are top of the Olden Days absolute star list, which would be an interesting thing to compile as well. It would have David Jason, Rowan Atkinson, and various other people on it too.
Mainly actors, because it's the actors who make these things work.
And the screenwriter of Ghost would be there too, along with Whoopi Goldberg. So there we go, that's taken quite some time to say. One word on my piece of card, Arnold, translates into a lot of analysis, and that's Arnold and Hey Arnold for you. I had some trouble between watching the Jungle movie for the first time and watching this DVD set, coming to terms with exactly how I felt about Hey Arnold. I feel happy to have done so now. It's not a consistently brilliant show, as many people would contend it was, and I would once have contended it was, but it does have brilliance in it. A lot of brilliance in it. And we've gone over a lot of the reason behind that, the voices that put that brilliance in. But of course, as we've said about many shows, it is difficult, nay impossible, to be consistently brilliant, consistently anything, with lots of different writers, lots of different creative inputs, if there is so much material that they're aiming to put out and having to get out in a certain amount of time. We've said it about 65-episode cartoon shows like Thundercats and Filmation's Ghostbusters and Bravestar and He-Man and She-Ra. You're bound to get your inconsistencies and duds in amongst 65 episodes at a time there. And of course, as we always come back to, the same is true of Extreme Ghostbusters with its 40 episodes. And there is a heck of a lot of Hey Arnold, particularly for a Nicktoon at the time. Since the Olden Days, of course. We've had Nicktoons going on for years and decades, Fairly Odd Parents, SpongeBob SquarePants. But Hey Arnold, with its 5 seasons, 100 episodes, and movie, was the only one that came anywhere close to Rugrats for output back in the day. There is an awful lot of Hey Arnold, and inevitably, an awful lot of it is complete crap. Particularly the stuff written by Craig Bartlett, though not exclusively. But within it, there's some absolutely wonderful stuff. From Franny, from Torin, from Spencer, from Justin, from others. And it really was a very satisfying experience watching all that again and getting to grips with it and really, really appreciating some of it. So thank you, that utility company, for dicking us about and giving us that Amazon voucher. Coming back to the Jungle movie, yeah, there are big problems with it. Well, it's a load of crap, really, as we said before in quite some detail. I still have my 2 thumbs ups about it, which I appreciate in some ways. The kiss scene and Helga and Gerald exchanging a look. Uh-oh, Arnold's parents are nuts. The rest of it needs completely redoing. The good things, as we said, were ripped out of it. The heart, the golden heart, was ripped out of it with no SH essay contest with the development with Eduardo. There's not a lot worth really watching in it, but it certainly has sparked some more thoughts in us since watching it for the second time.
One line gave us a chuckle, didn't it? Franny as Helga describing Arnold's bloody parents as those lost losers.
Thank you, Franny, for that. That was brilliant, and we hadn't remembered it was coming, and it was wonderfully delivered.
What I don't think I retained from the start of the movie to the end of the movie, or at least the crappy reveal about Eduardo and La Sombra not being the same person, was the effect that the very beginning had on me. It actually made me think, as I was reminded watching it again, yes, they're going to do it. They're definitely going to reveal Eduardo as La Sombra or an antagonist, because in this dream sequence he's being presented as a malevolent force, as the thing that rips Arnold's parents out of his life. Now that's clearly left over from the late, and in some ways great, Steve Vixton's script. That would have been a great thing to set up, to lay the groundwork like that, to reveal that Eduardo is actually evil.
It really struck me there when we were watching it. Eduardo comes swooping in his plane to take Arnold's parents away from him. And how is Eduardo presented visually there? In shadow, because he is the shadow, La Sombra.
I need you for one last mission. That's not okay. And then later on, oh, I'm the real Eduardo. I'm your parents' bestest friend in the whole world. Suddenly what Arnold was dreaming is okay. Look, Craig, if you're going to do that, then change the beginning as well, for goodness sake.
If we're making an Olden Days blacklist of characters we absolutely hate, there's no competition at the top for Miles and Stella Shortman, leaving Arnold, whom we all love when he's really truly Arnold, mainly thanks to the fact that Helga loves him, but also because he is very lovable, with a hole. It would have been better for him emotionally if they had left him with definitely dead parents, because then there wouldn't be a hole to fill wondering about what happened to them. As anyone with any intelligence knows, who is a fan of Hey Arnold, the best person to fill that hole for him eventually with love and stability is of course Helga, once the two of them completely break free of the influence of Craig Bartlett and his claymation mindset. But just magically having those parents back in his life suddenly to fill that hole, well, it fills the curiosity. In practical terms, it tells you what happened, but is it immediately going to solve all the emotional problems in his life, particularly as they've come back, the parents have come back from the jungle totally nuts, as Helga and Gerald have noticed? And I found a chat where Craig Bartlett said something like, oh yeah, Miles and Stella have gone gaga in the jungle, haven't they? Arnold's going to get to the point, if I get to make my season 6, where he wishes he'd left them where they were. You're all over the place, aren't you, Craig?
You were saying to me about how Craig didn't really create Arnold, and you were also saying to me that Miles and Stella are given credit in scripts by Craig Bartlett for the good altruistic person that he is, but they had nothing to do with that. That's Grandma, and particularly Grandpa, and the other people in his life who have raised him, influenced him growing up, actually been around. And then I spotted the parallel. Craig Bartlett is like Arnold's parents. They get the credit for creating him, but none of them really had anything to do with making him.
So there we are. I'm very glad to be taking away from the complete DVD set the feeling that I've fully come to terms with my feelings about Hey Arnold, all the positive feelings I have about Arnold and Helga as individual characters and as a couple, future couple. I mean, in practical terms, the Jungle movie does get them there or thereabouts, certainly to the threshold of where they should be coming together as a couple. The only question is, how are they then going to interact as a couple in the future? We all have our ideas about that. There are many interesting and possibly accurate ideas. We've spoken before about Franny's desire for Helga to be grounded in her relationship with Arnold, which is absolutely excellent. The only interpretation that is definitively completely wrong is Craig Bartlett's interpretation, with his conflict and his clash of personalities. No, Craig, Arnold and Helga never had clashing personalities. They have very complementary personalities, feelings, souls. They do just have different emotional wiring, and once they're wired up together, that wiring is going to work out perfectly for both of them. A couple more words to say about the Jurassic Park franchise. Of course, they haven't left it alone. Goodness knows if it'll be left alone in future. But since it was last mentioned on the Olden Days, there has been another Jurassic Park, Jurassic World release, Jurassic World Rebirth, which you went to see in the cinema, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I had very low expectations, and I went because it was during a period of some rather monotonous indoor work that I was doing, and I wanted a change, and I was curious to see it. But my opinion of the first Jurassic World movie has been dropping off fairly gradually over the years. I never did think very much of Fallen Kingdom or Dominion, except for a few performances in Dominion, which are totally counterbalanced by the actors that I really, really don't like. I thought that the cast of Jurassic World Rebirth was overall very watchable, and David Koepp returned to write the script, which was probably a bit less ambitious than its recent predecessors, and therefore there was less to kind of completely screw up and make nonsensical. So for those reasons, I'd rather watch Jurassic World Rebirth than any of the other Jurassic World movies. Obviously, it was absolutely nothing to the original. I always find the dinosaurs quite engaging, even if they're not really part of a proper plot, even if the situations in which people encounter them are absolutely stupid and ridiculous and unbelievable compared to the one in the original Jurassic Park. By the one, I mean being stuck outside the T-Rex paddock, obviously. I did feel that this time, and this is something that the other Jurassic World movies don't do actually, we didn't see enough of the same dinosaurs. They were on a kind of relay. It was this dinosaur, that dinosaur, T-Rex, never see it again. So that was a bit disappointing. Overall, I found it mildly diverting and a good change from what I had been doing, but not terribly worthy as a movie.
Speaking of David Koepp, which you did a little while ago, wasn't it interesting when I found his original screenplays for Jurassic Park and The Lost World online? What an absolute misogynist. And thank goodness for Laura Dern, and we suspect Kathleen Kennedy, coming in like Lisa Groening and making sure that in the final result, women are people too.
David Koepp was, of course, directly influenced by Michael Crichton's novel, which I don't think presents women awfully well.
Like I've said before, those Jurassic Park actors do such a wonderful job of bringing to life these characters who don't really know each other, feel a bit awkward, but don't have unnecessary beef and antagonism. It feels very realistic in that way, meeting these new people and being thrown into this weird situation. I think that works very well, and that's all down to the actors, not the screenwriting. Of course, Michael Crichton wrote an initial screenplay for Jurassic Park, the movie, which they didn't like. I guess Steven Spielberg didn't like, and he got David Koepp to rewrite it. I can very much visualise Michael Crichton being the one to put in Ellie Sattler is flattered by Ian Malcolm's attention in the helicopter and looks at Grant hoping he's feeling jealous, which of course Laura Dern didn't play because Laura Dern has self-respect and respect for other women, and she knows it's important to put that across in a big blockbuster movie. But certainly that made it through to the final script. David Koepp didn't get rid of it at any stage. Steven Spielberg didn't veto it at any stage. And I don't think we'd see a screenplay making it through to pre-production in that state nowadays, and rightly so. When we did our Fort Boyard podcast, we weren't as familiar with the whole of Fort Boyard as we are now. Hadn't watched it through quite so much, come to terms with it quite so well, and there was some dwarf confusion. Obviously, everyone knows that André Boucher as Jacques or Passepartout, has been making Fort Boyard for all different countries since 1990 and still continues to do so. Good for you, Andre. I hope you keep doing it for many more years. But we did have some confusion about his partners in the Channel 5 version. Jules isn't just in the first series of that, he's in the first 3 series, and then he retires from international versions of Fort Boyard before doing another 10 years of just France. And it's Denis who only does the 1 series with Leslie Grantham, Melinda Messenger and Geoffrey Belden. But I'm not surprised if we thought we'd seen him more than that when we made that podcast, because of course he's also in the Challenge, Jodie Penfold, D.I. Burnside, Captain Baker series. So it's not that we hadn't seen a lot of Denis around, it's just that we thought we'd seen more of him on Channel 5 than we actually had, though we thought we'd seen a lot less of Jules than we actually had.
Point of interest, Denis' name is Jules in the Jodie Penfold series. They like Jacques and Jules. They don't consider that they are another series of what Melinda and Leslie were making, so they go with Jules. Why not?
So hopefully that's that dwarf confusion cleared up. A quick note about Red Dwarf, which you were referencing earlier with the Pratt version of Alvin. That's good old Timothy Spall and his Pratt version of Rimmer, which makes us laugh very much, like everything Timothy Spall says in Back to Reality. And the point of interest is that it was announced there were going to be some new Red Dwarf specials for 2025, which didn't actually end up being made going ahead with, which was a bit of a shame. It's 6 years now since they all managed to get together and make something, The Promised Land. Will they ever get back together for another Red Dwarf? It looks less and less likely, doesn't it, the more time passes? If they do so, will Doug Naylor finally let the show have that elusive, definitive ending?
Probably not. What I've read that Craig Charles has revealed about the plot of this one that never happened sounds like it was going to be the same old thing, absolutely no resolution, something to do with a younger version of Lister. And Craig Charles suggested that the effect that was needed to create this younger Lister was too expensive, and that was the reason the specials never got made. Perhaps it's only a reason rather than the reason, I don't know.
I really would like to see Chris Barry, Craig Charles, Danny Don-Jules, Norman Lovett, Robert Llewellyn and Chloe Annette come back together and make a final Red Dwarf special, a definitively final Red Dwarf special, sometime in the next few years, while they're all still viable. So I kind of hope they do, but yeah, it's not very likely that Doug Naylor's going to write a proper finish, so I guess in some ways it doesn't make much difference either way, really. There was a new Superman movie out last year. I mentioned talking about Man of Steel with Henry Cavill, which was a new Superman movie 13 years ago. I didn't like the aspect of doing it as a first contact movie rather than what I would term a superhero movie. It sounds like in this more recent 2025 one, they've gone similarly for a different angle rather than a first contact movie, an immigration movie, Superman having trouble as an immigrant, which I'm sure is equally stupid. I'd much rather just watch Superman using his powers in believable and entertaining ways, which, as I've said before, is what I do like about the Christopher Reeve movies.
I saw the trailer for this new Superman when I went to see Jurassic World Rebirth. It came immediately after a trailer for the new Fantastic Four film, in which there's going to be a baby who is a blood relative of all except the big rock Fantastic Four member. I don't really know them, I don't know their names, but this, together with the Superman immigration movie, really struck me as this is what they're doing now. They're trying to find some new angle, trying to combat this lack of originality with new spins on old ideas. And I don't like that. I like some new ideas, which have never had any spin on them, of new things, and traditional adaptations of old things.
All these new spins and new agendas they try to put in things nowadays, they all just add to the overall crapness of modern adaptations of things that have been adapted much better in the past by people who actually knew how to do it. And that's why we spend a lot of time watching DVDs, mainly of stuff that was made before DVDs were invented. In the second half of 2025, South Park did finally release its delayed 27th season. They had some legal troubles with Paramount and streaming. I don't know the details. I don't want to know the details. We talked on our South Park podcast about the show losing its way, not really being about Stan, Kyle, Cartman and Kenny anymore. And from what I've read of season 27, I think it's suffering very badly from that in its most recent iteration. But one notable thing that did strike me was what they've done with Donald Trump. Now, they had to do something after Trump became the new Grover Cleveland and was against all reason elected for a second non-consecutive term in the White House in 2024. How was South Park going to deal with that? While they were hoping Trump would be ousted by Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, unfortunately he wasn't, so South Park have had to deal with it. But Donald Trump on South Park is not Mr. Garrison anymore. Of course, South Park never makes sense at the best of times, so that doesn't really matter that Donald Trump now exists independently of Mr. Garrison. And they very deliberately made Donald Trump into Saddam Hussein Mark II. Back in 1998-99, the cutout of Saddam Hussein with Matt Stone doing that funny voice, faux Canadian voice, because Saddam Hussein premiered in Terrence and Phillip, Not Without My Anus, was groundbreaking and funny and innovative, and him being in a relationship and going to bed with Satan was cutting and also amusing. South Park satire at its best. They've repeated that exact same thing more than 25 years later. Matt Stone doing that Saddam Hussein voice for the cutout of Donald Trump. Trump and Satan are in a relationship. I mean, Satan has evolved into more of a protagonist on South Park over the years than he was in the late 90s, so I don't think that really washes anymore. I've read some very positive reaction to how they have been lampooning Trump, and of course that's very relevant to how a lot of people are feeling nowadays, but as a continuation of South Park, as that thing I've always wanted it to do, focus on the four boys as friends against the world, doing satire and social commentary along the way. I don't get the sense it's really doing that anymore, and I don't think I could really engage with it.
It sounds like maybe it would have been better to put South Park to bed and have a different project, which was a sort of 2D animation, spitting image, satirical political sketch show thing.
God, if we think back to season 7 of South Park, all about the Mormons and how that spun them off into a successful Broadway musical called The Book of Mormon. It shows how Matt Stone and Trey Parker were kind of needing to move on creatively from South Park at that point. I've mentioned before how in season 8 of South Park, Cartman, speaking for Trey Parker, first says, "I don't like having to come up with ideas for new shows all the time. It makes my head hurt." They're talking about a school news show there, as well as in a wider sense, South Park itself. So yeah, I think the whole concept of South Park has become very redundant. That season 15 mid-season closer that we talked about so much on the South Park podcast, with Stan getting old, unlike Arnold being allowed to have a 10th birthday at last, even though Arnold's birthday is apparently the 7th of October, as far as we can tell. He never turns 10 during 4th grade, despite the fact that he should after about a month. Yeah, the way Stan's feeling about South Park and the whole concept of carrying on there should have led into that graceful wind down that was obviously being planned when they got to the middle of season 15 and had been completely abandoned when the show had been renewed again and they came back after the mid-season break. So yeah, I maintain that's it. That's the right place. And in many ways, that's where my heart will always stay with South Park, with that as the end. And that becomes truer and truer as time moves on and the landslide brings us all down further and further. Lastly, on our Close But No podcast, when we were talking about Seesaw and other such shows for that sort of age group, from when we were very young, preschool, lunchtime sort of thing, we mentioned a lot of shows there and talked about them with some interest and enthusiasm. A lot of almost 40-year-old memories there that were very fun to go through. But I can't believe we neglected to mention amongst all the shows there, The Wombles. a true national institution. As a pop group, just ask Alice from The Vicar of Dibley. Speaking of which, we never did get round to linking together the reference to somebody who wasn't very well. In fact, she was dead. And Alice, having said that on The Vicar of Dibley, referencing back to the original Christopher Reeve Superman movie. So there you go, there's another loose end. And yeah, also as quite enduring TV characters. I remember watching in that sort of seesaw time slot The Wombles, narrated so wonderfully by Bernard Cribbins. I always liked Wellington best. I'm not sure why. I guess his hat was largely blue. But also he's a nice character, like Edward from Thomas the Tank Engine, in amongst other characters who aren't always quite so nice. I did always appreciate that sort of character. Do you remember watching it at all when you were very young?
Vaguely, but I can't say any more than that. I just have a dim impression. Now, Alice drafted as a question for David Horden on Radio Dibley if you could meet, talk to, interact with any character from fiction, which Womble would it be? I said Wellington. You agreed with me. I was really thinking about the books there, in which, as I recall, Wellington is the only character who has decent ideas which aren't complete nonsense. But in terms of watching the Wombles on television, I did get quite interested when I was really too old for it, in society's terms, in a kind of reboot that they had on CITV in the late 90s. With Bernard Cribbins, I seem to recall from not originally, but seeing a video later in life that he'd do all the voices as one would do voices when reading through a story, rather than act the parts.
Yes, that can be a very effective way of doing these things. Bernard Cribbins does it so well there. Actually, one thing we came across, had another look at, where the narrator doing it doesn't quite have the skill for that, was Ronnie Corbett doing Roger Hargreaves' Timbuktu. So look out for that if you want to see the line that you need to be better than to pull off that sort of thing.
This more recent Womble series didn't have that. It had actors playing the parts and there wasn't any kind of narration. They'd just have conversations. And for some reason, I got quite interested in it. I thought the performances were fun. I thought the stories were decent. The characters that I chiefly got interested in at the time and chiefly remember now were, in a sense, new characters, as in Bernard Cribbins didn't have anything to do with them. Alderney and Shancy both appear briefly in at least one original book, and they were brought into the show as main characters to get a few more women other than Madame Cholet in. I didn't get the impression from the book that Shancy was a Chinese Womble. I'm not sure what Elizabeth Beresford really thought she was doing with that character, but in the show, Shancy appeared to have come from China. And she and Alderney would hang out a lot and they were friends, and I tend to kind of think of them together for that reason. And then there was also Stepney. Now, I never really got the impression that Wombles were white people until they brought in a token black Womble from the rough part of London, whose name was Stepney. Do I sound like I'm being a bit satirical? Well, there's no need, because the point is, was the character any good or not? And I really enjoyed Stepney. I enjoyed the voice performance. He's very fun, very engaging, and he had a bit of a thing going with Alderney, I thought, and I became a bit of an Alderney and Stepney shipper.
I remember Stepney on a return visit to his home borough had a friend cut from similar cloth called Bermondsey.
Quite literally from similar cloth.
And yes, like Arnold and Helga, Stepney and Alderney could be excised from the show and put into all sorts of wonderful stories together. So there we are. That's certainly all the loose ends that we've now done our best to tie up. So, listeners, if you think you found any more in future, keep it under your hat. 10 years of the Olden Days comes to an end. Thank you very much for listening. Hopefully you've enjoyed at least some of what we've had to say to you, almost as much as we've enjoyed saying it. And I hope sometimes you might be tempted to look back on some of that catalogue of the Olden Days podcast on YouTube and or on Spotify, because I spent quite a lot of time getting it there in its current state, and it's well worth a few moments of consideration, at least here and there, I think you'll find. So that's how to make a nostalgic podcast for 10 years, and that's how for now. Good night out there, whatever you are.